Before we begin today's meeting, I've asked Regent Wilmot to begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. And it's uniquely important to her because her grandson is leaving for the Guard summer camp. So this is especially important and personal to you. So I'm going to ask you to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I'd like to call the special meeting of the Board of Regents for May 31, 2023. I'd like to call it to order. Could we have a roll call, please?
Regent Latoro, Regent Molina, Regent Pecos.
Here.
Regent Schultes, Regent Clare.
Yes.
Regent Kenny. Yes. Regent O'Connor. Here. Regent Schaefer.
Here.
Regent Shear. Here. Regent Stark. Here. Regent Whites.
Here.
Regent Wilmot.
Here.
A quorum is present.
Thank you. There's some different faces around, and we're going to do formal introductions at our next meeting, but I wanted to point out down at our far end, UNK Student Regent Timo Molina, UNL Student Regent Paul Pecos, UNMC's Student Regent Katie Schultes is on rotation, and this was a special meeting, so she wasn't able to get off rotation for this meeting, we don't think. And then down at the end, he'll be joining us momentarily is Hakeem Latoro, the student regent from UNL. Again, you'll hear more formal introductions of them at our next meeting. So, for all in attendance, please note that in compliance with the Nebraska Open Meetings Act, the board has posted a copy of the act near the south entrance to the boardroom. Additionally, I'd like to note that today's meeting is being held by virtual conferencing in accordance with Nebraska Revised Statute, Section 84-1411. Included in your materials, to my colleagues, included in your materials is a copy of the minutes from our meeting on April 7, 2023. I'd entertain a motion of approval.
I'll make that.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any corrections, comments to the minutes? Call the roll, please.
Regent Molina.
Present.
Regent Pecos. Yes. Regent Schultes is not here. Regent Latoro. Regent Kenny. Yes. Regent O'Connor.
Yes.
Regent Schaefer.
Yes.
Regent Shear. Yes. Regent Stark.
Yes.
Regent Whites.
Yes.
Regent Wilmot.
Yes.
Regent Clare.
Yes.
Minutes are approved.
Thank you. President Carter did not want to sit here. Instead, it was like he was guiding a ship in the Navy, and he wanted to stand at the podium. So, President Carter, I'm going to turn the meeting over to you and Chris Kaborik for a budget update.
Regent Clare, the chair, thank you for recognizing us to be here with you this morning. I'm going to take about 45 minutes, combination between myself and Chris Kaborik. We're going to give you something that's might appear to be kind of a state of the university presentation. Whenever you're going to talk about something like that, you're going to spend a little bit of time looking backwards, a lot of time looking at where we actually are. And for today's purpose, we will not focus too much on the future, except where we have some data mostly focused around our budget. So the first slide, and I apologize, we're going to use PowerPoint, and there's going to be some data presented here. But this is going to be done in a manner that I feel is important that we be as transparent as possible, particularly when we're talking about some of the data that I'll get into a little bit further. But, you know, if you take a look back at the history of this university, now 154 years, it has had strength, which comes from the work of our leaders, our boards, and it's always been able to make the right decision at the right time for the university. Pivotal decisions have added mission scopes. We've addressed pressing needs for our state. We've changed our business model, cost structure, and always we've sought to take care of our most important asset, our people. If you were to take a look here, and I'm not intending to go through this slide and hit all the highlights, but the one thing that jumps out at me and the one thing I want to stress with you is about every 15 to 20 years in our history, something happens that causes us a pivotal moment. And that's the title of this slide. And if I just go back to the time I came here to spend with you on January 1st, 2020, there's been kind of three big things that have driven us to what I would call this new pivotal moment. COVID is certainly a big part of that in 2020, and we'll talk a little bit about that and some of the things that we've done along the way. Certainly this discussion about budget, inflationary pressures, the cost of goods and services, that's had an impact on not just us, but the nation. And then the third is this discussion about what the value is of a higher education degree. This is a national discussion. We can talk details about what national enrollment numbers have looked like. Suffice to say, they've gone down, about 1.5 million fewer students just since the period of COVID across all of our campuses across the country. So those three things alone, just during my time here as your university system president, certainly brings us to a pivotal moment. So that's where we are, and the question mark there is, what are we going to do about it? So higher ed is at a crossroad. Let's go to the next slide. There's a long list here, but I'll tell you that as we're looking ahead, there are macroeconomic environment that we have to understand. Inflation is driving up payrolls and operating costs, new and sustained costs associated with the new normal, which is technology to support, which is a hybrid type in-person and virtual classes that we learned during COVID. I mentioned muted growth in state funding, and I'll talk more about this later, but I will tell you that we are pretty well resourced by the state and have historically been so, and I'll talk about this most recent budget cycle. But even with that, it hasn't been able to keep up with inflation, so that's why we mention muted growth. Demographic challenges, flat to declining high school graduates as birth rates fall. We're going to see that here in Nebraska around 2027, and then we'll see a recovery to where we'll go from roughly what's been an average of 25,000 Nebraska high school graduates a year back up north of 26,500 by the year 2032. So as we talk about the enrollment cliff and this declining birth rate, there will be a recovery. So we've got to be able to think through how do we get through the next 4 to 5 years and have a plan for that recovery. Increasing demand for institutional financial aid. This is tuition discounting. This is, the cost of higher education going up and up and up, and people saying, I can't afford it, looking for more tuition discounting. Federal relief funds are drying up. We know this. COVID relief that was sent around the nation, that's just about gone. Growing impact of social and political issues. And we're seeing this being legislated by many other states across the nation, in Florida and Texas and other states. We're not seeing quite as much here, but we've certainly had our discussions here around diversity, equity, and inclusion, about critical race theory, about academic freedom, even tenure. So these things continue to boil around the nation, and it's something we have to be paying attention to. Evolving employer needs, the cost of everything that an employer needs to do, healthcare, those costs are going up. And of course, students' increasing expectations about the services and value higher education should deliver. Certainly, there's an expectation that we have mental health services available to our students. There's a high cost to that. And we've had to make sure that we bake that into our student fees and all the things that our students expect us to deliver on campus. Go to the next slide. So institutions across the nation, and I've just highlighted 3 that should resonate with us, they're tackling this. It's a little bit of an eye chart. I know some of you have these slides in front of you, but if you look at the West Virginia University one, E. Gordon Gee, who is a 2-time president at the Ohio State University, pretty celebrated college president. I mean, this is almost like looking into the mirror for us. A budget of about $1.3 billion, and they've got a $35 million deficit that's going to grow over time if they don't take care of it. Rutgers, you can see some of the numbers up there that they're talking about, $125 million deficit, and even Penn State, $140 million structural deficit that they just kind of figured out that they had. What you're finding is across the nation is institutions are kind of taking 3 approaches to these structural deficits that they're seeing, same as us. Some of them are denying the necessity of serious cuts. Like many institutions, they have cash in reserves. They might be able to cash flow themselves out. They're counting on enrollment to bounce back at some point for more revenue. Some of them are using temporary filling budget holes through a variety of patchwork strategies or Band-Aids. And again, I use the cash flow example. And some are looking at reworking long-range plans, eliminating non-essential spending, and setting and investing in institutional priorities. Large flagship institutions, even in the Big Ten, as you see up here with Rutgers, are not immune to these challenges. And as Gordon G. states, from a short-term perspective, the budget challenges appear manageable, but from a long-term sustainability perspective, it is not, unless we budget strategically for the future. I'm going to transition here, and I'm going to let Chris Kabor come up, and he's going to give you a little bit of a deeper dive into where we see the budget.
Good morning. Thank you, President Carter. Just as a reminder, the university's fiscal year runs July 1st through June 30th, so we are wrapping up fiscal year 2023, and we'll bring forward to the board at the June meeting a budget for fiscal year 24. The state of Nebraska budgets on a biennial basis, so obviously we're looking forward to fiscal year 25, and through our university strategic plan, we're actually looking 5 to 10 years out. So lots of years to talk about here, lots of planning going on, lots of data. We're not going to go through a lot of detail today, but cover some of the highlights. Just a reminder, the university has about a $3 billion budget in total, but really the foundation of that is what we call the state aided or general fund budget, which is about $1 billion. And there's 3 primary levers that really impact that budget. On the funding side would be the funding we get from the state of Nebraska. That's appropriated to us by the legislature, approved by the governor, provided by state taxpayers. That's roughly 65% of that $1 billion. Roughly $650 million of our budget this year was provided by the state, which means roughly the other 35–40% comes from students and the tuition they pay. As President Carter indicated, we are very humbled and very blessed to have that strong support from the state. It's one of the reasons we have University of Nebraska has some of the lowest tuition increases across the country, and it's one of the greatest values we believe in higher education across the nation. And most like other education institutions, we spend most of those resources on our most important asset, and those would be our people. Our faculty, our staff, our researchers. 83% of our budget typically goes to payroll, benefits, compensation, health insurance, those kind of expenses. And obviously we have a very large physical plant infrastructure, 900 buildings across our campuses across the state. Takes a lot of energy, utilities, to run those buildings, maintenance, and so that's a big chunk of our operating expenses, roughly 5%, and then the other would be all the operating costs associated with running our programs and the university in general. So if we look to fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25, these are the assumptions we've been using across the university with leadership for planning purposes. And we'll cover the 3 big ones first. State funding, Governor Pillen recently signed the state's biennial budget, which will provide 2.5% annual increases to the university for fiscal years 24-25. In addition, there's 2 programmatic earmarks within that funding. In fiscal year 24, we will receive an additional $2 million for the Career Scholarship Program. This would be the 4th and final year of funding, so the total funding on that program now will be $8 million a year. That was started by Governor Ricketts, and that's a very important recruiting tool for our campuses. And then in addition, the very exciting Rural Health Complex, the partnership between UNMC and UNK. That facility, has started to break ground here, scheduled to break ground here later this year. More information will be coming to the board on that. But obviously you need funds to hire faculty, recruit staff, and run the operations. And so the state of Nebraska has committed $14.5 million in fiscal year 2025 to operate those programs. So very needed funding. Doesn't cover the basic core needs of the university, but great investments for those two initiatives. In terms of tuition, we are assuming, despite the challenges we're seeing across the country, we are optimistic. Our campuses are working hard on enrollment, but at this point, we are projecting flat enrollment for the next 2 years. As we get more data, we will obviously update that. We should probably note that we started this fiscal year down on enrollment in terms of about a $20 million impact on the budget. We'll talk about that in a little bit in terms of initiatives and strategies the campuses are working on. So we are starting a little bit in the hole this year, but going forward, we're hoping, anticipating, expecting enrollment to be flat over the next 2 years. Salaries, which has a huge impact on the expenditure component of the budget, is projected to be at 3%. That is what we have collectively bargained with our faculty unions at Kearney and Omaha. And we would provide 3% merit pools for all faculty and staff across the university system. Now, maybe not as great in magnitude in terms of the dollar impact. They are still having a significant impact on our operations, and that's just the general hyperinflationary environment we see right now in the economy. Health insurance has continued to be a challenge for us, not just inflation, but utilization by our employees. We're seeing trends of north of 10% in our health insurance plan. So that is something we have to take into account for the next 2 years. And then obviously inflation on goods, services, travel, all those things. So if you look at the statistics, CPI is right now about 5%. So that's what we have projected in for fiscal year 24. We are projecting that to slowly decline, go to 4% in 25 going forward. Couple of new investments that we were hoping to make in the budget for the next 2 years. One is mandatory. That would be to establish a deferred maintenance trust fund. This is required by LB 384, our new deferred maintenance partnership we have with the state of Nebraska. That requires us to put 2% of every project that we renovate into a trust fund that can be used for future deferred maintenance. This is related to the $400 million bond that we issued about two years ago now. So 2% on $400 million is $8 million a year that we will have to put away in our budget. And so we are, our strategy here is to build us some runway and do a $2 million increase for the next 4 years to start establishing that fund. Also, we need a President Carter mentioned technology become ever increasing in terms of the hybrid model that our students now expect. But in addition, I know our audit committee has talked a lot about cybersecurity and just all the infrastructure technology needs that goes along. So technology is something we continually will have to invest in, and so we also are projecting an additional $2 million in for technology enhancements each of the 2 years of the biennium. I really want to stress kind of that bottom line there that's highlighted in yellow. What's not included in this budget? There are no increases for new strategic investment opportunities included in this budget. So the numbers that we're going to talk about are basically what it takes to keep the railroad running. Not to invest in new programs, not to invest in student services, not to invest in mental health. This is what is needed to keep the status quo. If you add it all up, we're looking at total funding of just over $1 billion, $1,028 million. In the first year, that would increase to by $30 million in the next year. But you can see the challenge is our expenses as is would exceed that funding. And again, I want to stress, without any additional investments for new opportunities. So right now, the challenge before us is we're looking at somewhere let's round it up, a $50 million problem in the next fiscal year. Now again, 20 million of that is somewhat associated with the enrollment declines that we saw in fiscal year 23. And then this is pretty much a very simple math equation. On a $1 billion budget, if our top line revenues are growing roughly at 2% and our expenses are growing 4.5% to 5%, that's the $30 million bogey that we have to find every year. So a $20 million current year enrollment shortfall plus $30 million of expenses for the next 2 years lead to a 20 to a 50 to an $80 million shortfall. As President Carter indicated, there's lots of strategies, institutions, and we're not the only institution facing these challenges, and lots of strategies that institutions are using to mitigate this. One is some are relying on cash and just not making permanent cuts, trying to cash flow their way through it to see if they can find better times ahead, either through more students, more state support, or other funding sources. And so I wanted to just talk a little bit about cash. I know this has been brought up by policymakers. It's a very relevant question. It's a very good question. We strongly believe that this board, as you know, we are in a very good financial standing in terms of our balance sheet. This is echoed by the rating agencies from Moody's, S&P. We're very good spot in terms of overall financials. But I would say we hold adequate cash, but not excessive. The Business and Finance Committee, the Audit Committee, every year when we look at the financials, we talk about monthly days of cash. It's kind of an eye chart. It's hard to see a little bit, but that's what that dashboard on the right side kind of shows you. And if you just look at the red bars, you can see our cash has gone up and down a little bit, but it's been pretty steady, pretty constant. We're not seeing wild swings, which is what rating agencies really like to see. And then the bottom set of charts are us compared to many of our Big Ten peers. And so you can see we are not the lowest, but we're certainly not the highest. We're kind of in the middle. So if you look at the medians, either from the Big Ten or AA1 rated institutions, we're right at the median. So we think we're in an adequate place in terms of a cash position going forward. The other thing we need to talk about cash is, cash has lots of different flavors to it. It's just not all sitting in a bank account for President Carter, the chancellors, or myself to go tap. It's sprinkled across hundreds, if not thousands, of departments. And so that if we, in a catastrophic event, we would have to go call all those departments and say, hey, can you give some of this up to help cover this $80 million shortfall we have? So think about cash held by our housing units, our unions, our parking garages. Those are all collateral for the bonds for investors. So if you start pulling that out, you're going to have detrimental impact on your bond ratings. Think about, we run a full-fledged farm at UNL, and so they need cash to go buy seed corn or hay or whatever the other items they need to get the next crops planted next season. So if we use that cash, what impact does that have on them? Husker Athletics, if you buy season football tickets, you pay for those tickets in March and April, but we don't use those funds until, July, August, September. And so those are the kind of things that not all cash is free and clear. Some of it is committed. And so we have to be very careful when we look at a balance sheet number, cash on a balance sheet versus what's absolutely available to us. So I would tell you that we have roughly $100 million for a catastrophic event for President Carter to rely on. That's roughly 34 days of cash. So if you think about your own personal finances, I think, general rule of thumb is you like to have 6 months of cash for a rainy day. So we certainly, I would say, argue, are not excessive in terms of the cash we are sitting on. And again, I would argue the cash provides us a runway. It's a little bit of a safety net. It'll help us to make some pragmatic decisions on cuts, but it's not going to solve the long-term challenges that we're talking about today. Another thing we can look at is tuition rates. Most of our Big Ten peers are increasing tuition in the next fiscal year. We've had the benefit of keeping tuition rates flat for the last 2 years, but as we have talked in the past, this is a conversation we need to have. This is the chart showing the increase most of our Big Ten peers are projecting for next academic year, so academic year 23-24. So I want to just remind everybody that Nebraska has the lowest tuition in the Big Ten at this point. So when you hear other Big Ten institutions increasing tuition 2, 3, 4% on a dollar magnitude, most of their students are paying more out of pocket than students at Nebraska. And that's what this chart is trying to depict. So most of our peers are from 0 to 4, 0 being Purdue, which has had a long tradition of not increasing tuition. But most of them are in the 2 to 4% range. And you can see for a student, a lot of assumptions on this chart, for a student who pays the full sticker price, and we know most of our students receive some kind of financial aid, so most of our students would not pay this full amount. But if you're paying the full sticker price and you're taking a full 30 student credit hour load, this is how much it would cost for you for an academic year. For planning purposes, we have put in a 3.5% rate increase for University of Nebraska undergraduate residents. So at UNL, that would be a $9 per credit hour increase. So over a 30 student credit hour academic year load, that would be a $270 increase to the tuition they pay in academic year 23-24. At UNO, that would be an $8 increase. So UNO students would see about a $240 increase. And at UNK, that would be roughly a $7 per credit hour increase or a $210 increase. So not the lowest, but still in the lower quartile of what that would do. And the reason we put that in there because it would provide some runway as we come up with strategies to deal with this challenge. And so this is the same chart we just looked at, a $49 million shortfall in fiscal year 24, which is what we're really focused on at this point. Fiscal year 25 is shown for planning purposes only. But from a $49 million shortfall, we have two things that can bring that down. One is the proposed tuition increase, which is about $11.4 million of revenue that would generate. And then we do have some cuts going on in progress. So I've just listed those that are well documented. So at UNL, the Academic Planning Committee is going through a process right now looking at $10.7 million of cuts at the UNL campus. I know our other campuses are looking at that as well, but we just have not documented that yet, so I don't have those included. But if we just take those two items and factor those in, our $49 million problem, what we'd be looking at would be roughly over $27 million shortfall for next fiscal year. We're not making any assumptions on tuition for fiscal year 25. That is something we can have conversations later about. So at this point, we assume no tuition increase in 2025, which still would leave us with a $57 million shortfall in the second year. Now, to put that in context, this is a little bit of this is a chart of our historical budget shortfalls. And so we have had budget shortfalls for most every year. But what has really changed since, I would say, over the last 5 years is the magnitude of those shortfalls. Now, some of them are caused by the extreme event that President Carter talked about, COVID being the largest one, which started in 2020. As you remember, we did a couple of things. We froze tuition. We initiated Nebraska Promise. We made investments in faculty salaries at UNL and UNMC. And we planned those out over a long number of years. So that's why you saw the cuts in 23 being much greater than they are in 20 or 21. But I will go back to 2019, which when the state of Nebraska experienced some recessionary pressures in the ag economy, as for those of you that were here, the university was facing a 4% cut from the state, which would be roughly $24, $25 million. Through a lot of good work, we got that reduced down to 2%, but it still had a pretty significant impact on our budget. And at that time, we went through a process called BRT, or Budget Response Teams, and many of you probably remember this is where we consolidated a number of back office functions, information technology, procurement, facilities. To put in perspective the challenge that we're talking about for the next 2 years, and I would argue perhaps even farther, is we're looking at about a BRT for the next year going forward. And again, I want to emphasize, that's just to kind of keep the railroad running. No additional investment opportunities for academic programs, student services, or other items. So hopefully that gives you some context in terms of the challenges that we've been working through and talking about. And I'll turn it over to President Carter now for some other comments.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I'm going to just add a couple comments to his presentation before I go into kind of a next phase of looking at how we're doing. The first is strategically. Since I've come here, I've said two things. One is I would not go to the legislature and expect them to balance our budget. As Chris pointed out, we are one of the best supported university systems in the country. We should be very thankful to the people of Nebraska, the taxpayers, the legislature. And some would say, well, you didn't get the 3% that you asked for this year. And that's because the state had other priorities. And I'm really thankful that we found a compromise between the Appropriations Committee, the 49 members of the unicameral, and the governor to get to our 2.5%, because a 2%, which was proposed, would have made this just that much more challenging. The other point is we're not going to balance our budget on the backs of our students. Yes, we're talking about a proposed 3.5% tuition rate increase. We know that the students who are least capable of paying that won't, because they're either Nebraska Promise, Pell Grant, or get some other financial aid. But if we were to try to balance this budget right on tuition, we'd be talking double-digit tuition increase, probably closer to 11%. Now, for those of you who've been here a lot longer than I have, you know that we have a history of having done that before. And I can tell you, given the current climate of what people are talking about in higher ed, that would be a disastrous effect for us. We would lose, my view, somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 students, and we can ill afford to do that by trying to tell everybody that that's how much we want to raise tuition. I'll also point out that as we're looking forward, and in the slides that Chris presented, we're talking about tuition rate increase that we'll propose and bring to you for vote on June 22nd. We are not proposing any changes to the fiscal year 25 budget. We'll have to discuss that further down the road. So all those numbers you saw were for the 1-year tuition rate increase proposed. Okay. I guess the other last point I'll make, and I'll wrap this up when I come back around, is, you know, we've cut $75 million out of our budget over the last 5 years. If you look at this slide, we cut $50 million roughly just during the COVID period. And we did that with efficiencies without going after faculty, mostly on administrative staff, and looking for efficiencies. I'm going to tell you that we've hit just about as many efficiencies as we can get. So this next 2 lines are 2 BRTs in a row. Not very likely that we're just going to go find another 5% in efficiencies across the university system, because that's what we're talking about. And these things have to be structural. They have to be permanent as we look forward to the landscape. So that's, I know we're spending a lot of time on the budget, but for us to understand where we really are and where we may need to go, we've got to understand this. This is really important. All right, the next few slides, I'm just going to talk about some things that we can measure. And I want to remind everybody, as we look at these measurables, these are just some of the things we measure. And these come from national IPEDS data, so it's consistent across you know, all the programs. It's not intended to compare one of our campuses to the other. They have comparisons to their peers. So as you look at them, it's a little unfair sometimes to say, well, if UNL's doing this one thing and UNK is doing something else, who's doing better? That's not the point of what we're going to go through here. The point here is to show trends, given how we've been resourced and the level of effort that we've been doing. And I'll wrap it all up at the end and try to maybe give a so what to this for you. Let me show this slide. If you've been listening to any of my public speeches or anything I've been talking about lately, I keep going back to this. This is the reason we exist. This is the reason we've evolved and become not only with the ability to survive but thrive in our 154-year history. I mean, our number one job is to do teaching of undergraduates, then graduate students, and then our postdocs. Then research and creative activity. And then third, extension, outreach, and lifelong learning. So I'm going to go through just a couple slides, some metrics to show how we're doing in some of those category mission sets. First, headcount and enrollment. So as I've shared in the previous meetings, we have struggled with enrollment. Over and over, we've been making this a top priority for ourselves. And this just quickly shows you where our high marks were, where we are now. If you look at the next slide, it gives you a kind of a bar graph to look at where we've been over the last 5 years compared to the 5 years previous. So if you look at that, you'd probably say, well, that doesn't look so bad. There is one really great point in there, and that's UNMC, who have grown enrollment for 22 years straight. And everybody else looks relatively flat with a little bit more decrease in UNK. Now, go back, please. Just stay there for a second. I'll remind everybody, because of the levers that we did pull during COVID, keeping tuition flat, creating Nebraska Promise, opening our campus, all those things that we did, we actually grew our enrollment to 52,000 students across the system. Today, we're closer to 48,500. We're down. We've been down, just edging down 1% to 2% over the last couple years. But if you look at it across all those years with our high water mark, mostly around 2017, our enrollment only looks to be down about 1% to 2%. And that may say, well, you're doing the right things. You've got a relatively flat population where 80% of your students come from the state of Nebraska. What else can you do? I'm going to tell you that as we look forward, we're going to have to rethink what our baseline is. We're going to have to be realistic about the population that we have access to, our adult learners, our transfers coming from community college to us, and we're going to have to think about what that is. Instead of saying our target's going to be 50 to 51,000 all the time, it may be closer to 48. We don't know the answer to that. Doesn't mean that we still can't be making an effort. But this is something that's really important to me. And the chancellors hear it from me just about every time we meet. Okay, let's go to the next one. Retention. This is where we actually can make our own money, because once we get students coming in the front door, and I would argue that we haven't been doing a very bad job and that we can always do better, this is where I think we really can help ourselves more. So you can see we've had slight decreases in our 5-year average retention rates at each of our undergraduate campuses. And I would tell you, as we look at over the 5-year averages, just over the last year, we've seen a nice little uptick. But again, first to second year retention, as you compare that across all of our undergraduate campuses, and again, you notice UNMC is not up there. They're not there. If you want to know where their targets should be, for Lincoln, it should be 85%, and they're just underneath that. And Omaha and Kearney should be at 80%. And I know all the campuses are working really, really hard. And this is like everybody level of effort. It's hard work. It's got to have student contact. You got to be able to talk to students, got to understand what their challenges are. But this is where we can probably help ourselves more going forward. But let's face it, high school graduation classes are going to be shrinking. Retention and persistence are going to become our critical metrics to watch and improve if we want to deliver the graduates and workforce Nebraskans and our members of the business and industry expect of us. Another metric that most universities pay attention to are graduation rates. Now, I'm going to tell you right up front, I care about graduation rates, but I care when I talk to business leaders about where our graduates go and what do they do. I was recently out at Kearney when they did an event celebrating their ambassadors. And when you listen to those students and where they're going and what they're doing, you walk away thinking we're going to be just fine in the future. But if you take a look at the aggregate, the big picture numbers, again, our graduation rates have some promise, but some things that we can continue to work on. So on a positive note, we've seen increases in the 5-year averages of our 4-year and 6-year graduation rates, particularly at UNO, where our rate has increased substantially. That said, I would just tell you we need to continue to improve our value propositions. If you were to take a look at this across either national trends or peer trends, you know, we're fairly competitive. There are some areas that we're not as competitive, and you could argue maybe we shouldn't be comparing ourselves to some of the top performers in the Big Ten. But if we're going to be in the Big Ten, we got to be able to compare ourselves to them. So, we're not competing at those level of rates at either the 4-year or even the 6-year. And by the way, if you want to know what 4-year graduation rates are nationwide, it's about 40% across all the colleges and institutions. And if you go to the 6-year look, again, we've seen some promises here, but again, and this is the standard by which all universities are measured, if we're saying, hey, you have a 2 in 3 chance of graduating just because you're in the university, I'm not very happy with that. I think we can do better. And again, this takes a lot of work. And again, the national average is about 62% on 6-year graduation rates, and you can see the comparisons that we have there. Okay, we're going to go talk a little bit about research. So we report this every year, and when you see them, it generally looks like a really good story. And there's the bar graph to just show how we've done. And I'll tell you, it makes me proud. I know how much work goes into this. I mean, we're an R1 university at UNL. Our med center's been doing some really great work, and even UNO is starting to punch above an R2 weight. Our 5-year average growth in federal research expenditures is changing at a much slower rate than our total figure. And I would tell you, this is a place that we need to improve, and we can be increasing at a much higher rate, similar to a lot of our Big Ten peers, many of whom are increasing at 15 to 20% in federally funded research. And I will tell you, as the national boards that I sit on at the Council for Education, Council of Innovation, and Competitiveness, and now this new higher education strategy project that I'm working on, there are federal dollars out there. Now, I'll also point out that we pride ourselves on the type of ag research that we can do, particularly at UNL. And as we just had our Doherty Water for Food Global Summit a couple of weeks ago, CEO Beth Ford from Land O'Lakes made a national call saying that our country is not spending enough on ag research. And that's something that I think at my level and many others, we can continue to push hard on, because we could be a bigger recipient of some of that work. Next slide is just going to talk a little bit about research return. So this is extramural support. One way to measure return on investment is in research is looking at the external or non-university funding generated for each dollar we invest in research. So as you can see on this slide, UNMC and UNO have impressive returns, 4-to-1 and 3.75-to-1. And again, I would submit that our flagship could improve in this area just by comparison. Another interesting metric is federal support per dollar we invest. Again, Med Center and UNO are making impressive returns. And at UNL, we're still yielding less than $1 in federal funds for each $1 we invest. And I will tell you that as we look to the future, I know we're going to work harder to turn that around. Operational, let's talk about student to faculty ratio. Now, it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that if our enrollment's going down and we don't change our staffing, guess what happens? Our student to faculty ratio changes. And it's not just a matter of where we are, it's where do we want to be. Now, I'm not telling anybody's at fault here. Nobody missed this, nobody missed an action here. I'm just saying this is the reality, this is the data of where we are. And at the end of the day, this is a resource deployment issue. If we look at the student to faculty ratios, and I'll tell you, I mean, I love going to UNK because they have an intimate level experience there that none of our other campuses can do, but they also have a 13-to-1 faculty to student ratio. And I would tell you that operationally, we probably need to be seeing something closer to 16-to-1. So that's something that we have to think about, and you can see the numbers on the other campuses. So if an enrollment student interest doesn't match our current staffing structure, we're going to think about how we're going to adjust. Go to the next slide. So this is revenue generated per general fund dollar. So this is not the Trip Umbach report that you heard me talk about some months ago, where we're talking about a 9-to-1 return on every dollar we get from the state. That's a broader. This is a subset of that. So again, if we were a business and we were to evaluate the return on investment for each of our business units, we are getting one heck of a return from a number of our campuses. And again, I'll highlight UNO because they have been effectively deploying the limited resources that we have been giving them. UNL and UNMC also have impressive returns. And again, size of campus, resources, and all the others, the only school that's on a downward trend right now on this revenue generation is UNK. Well, let's go ahead and wrap up here on a couple of key points. And-use long-term budget and operating model from where I sit right now is unsustainable. We cannot keep just finding ways to budget cut. The macroeconomic headwinds expected are going to continue well past over the next 2 years. External help is not coming. What I mean by that is I'm not going to go to the state and say I need a 6 or 7% budget rate increase. I don't expect that to happen. The demographic challenges tell us that our enrollment data is not going to swing significantly up. We may see some improvements in international students. We may continue to find ways to attract out-of-state students, but guess what? All the other states in our country are in the same place. They are competing for their students and their talent. So as we've done in the past, we used a peanut butter budget reduction plan across the university, and I would tell you that's starting to show and maybe even weaken our entire institution, and that's going to have to probably stop. Now, finally, nothing is irreparable except a willing capitulation to just stay at the status quo. Now, as I reflect on all the things that I just told you today, I want to reflect on something that I learned as a very young naval aviator, my last flight I did at Top Gun. And they don't show you this in the movie, so this is not something you get to see, and most people don't even know that this is how things go. Your last flight is a graduation hop. It's a 1 versus 1. You and your airplane against an unknown airplane. At the time, in 1985, we had a highly classified program where we were flying Soviet jets out of an undisclosed airport in the middle of the high desert. You showed up in a piece of sky on a certain radio frequency, and another airplane showed up. You passed each other at 500 feet at 1,000 miles closure, and you went into a dogfight. 1 versus 1. Lasted 2.5 minutes. You either won, you lost, or you had a stalemate. The point of telling you that story is that's not where the education happens. You can metricize that fight, you could divvy it up and determine why you were good or bad or whatever. It's what happens after the fight. And that's where the debrief happens. In a Top Gun debrief, and this is one of the highest learning institutions ever developed in the military, you break it down, you take the who out of it, and you decide what was good, and anything that wasn't good was in another column. It was just called an other. And the other is where you learn. So as I showed you some of this information today, I want you to know that there are some goods. We have a lot of goods here. We are a good university system. And I don't want anybody to take away that, we're in a place of struggling. We have one of the most affordable, accessible educations in the country. We have incredible faculty. We have meaningful research. And we are an ag research land-grant university. But we do have some others. And we got to live realistically about some of our challenges. We got to be able to talk about it in a transparent way, not feel like anybody's being persecuted for not doing their job well enough. We got to improve in certain areas. So I would tell you that's where our situation is today. I just described to you a whole bunch of goods and a few others. And I will tell you that as I came here, I had big ideas for where this university would want to go. And I always felt like this is a place, this is a culture of people here in the state of Nebraska that want to compete. And I don't want to keep playing defense, worrying about budget cuts. I want us to get back to being on the competing, playing offense, and putting points on the board. I think we can do some big things, and particularly change our formula. I think we can still improve in enrollment. I know we can do some really big things in research because we have the talent here. We've made some great progress on salaries. We did that in the height of COVID when it looked like we were going to lose students and have real budgetary pressures, and yet we still improved our salaries. I don't want to be in the middle of the pack or the lower pack in the Big Ten. I want us to be leading. And we can't do that if we're still having to worry about budget deficits. I want our A-list faculty to know how much I care about them and how much I want to continue to focus on that. We've done some great work during the COVID period. We've done some great work with our faculty senates in getting through some of the issues that we had. I think back on the bylaws changes that we had to get through, the fact that we got off the AAUP censure list, all the things that we said that we would do, in the height of all that, we were able to do. But again, we've still got some challenges out in front of us. I'm going to reiterate, this is not a resource problem. The state has continued to be a steady and generous partner to us, and they care about higher education in Nebraska. So this isn't a question of whether we should raise tuition by double digits. We know what happens when we do that because we've tried it before, we lose students. And the reality is that new resources going forward are going to be limited at the best. So no one is going to come to save us. As I said earlier, costs are going to keep going up. And as you heard Chris describe, that includes wages, and the competition for talent is just going to keep getting more intense. So that's our reality. And we'll do better about setting priorities in the context of that new reality and investing our resources into those priorities. So my concern is not that what we don't do, is that if we continue to behave in the manner that we have just even over the last 3 years, we'll basically maintain the status quo. We'll be a good university. But I want to be a great university. I want us to get through this period of time thinking about our structure and what we can do to be better organized and be attractive to all the students in this state. And at the end of the day, I want to set us up for the future. I think about where we're going to be in 2030 when the high school graduation rate starts to change. And I talked about that inflection point where we were, that every 15 to 20 years, if we set ourselves on the right course, we're going to be in a much, much better place. I've told this board in our terms internally, we need to be prepared to think differently about the future in the University of Nebraska. Business as usual is just not going to be able to cut it. This conversation is about the future of higher education. It's happening all over the country. And I can tell you, I will not be satisfied to be on these higher ed boards and listen to everybody else give us a solution. I want us to lead the way. So I think that's what you brought me here to do. And there's certainly been some major inflection points that we just talked about over the last few years. Nobody could have predicted COVID-19, philosophical shifts in the public narrative about the value of higher education, unprecedented inflation. Those are real challenges. But I learned playing sports a long time ago. If you're losing, you lose. At the end, it's no excuses. Nobody cares. So we got to be able to face our reality. Hope is not a course of action. And we're going to have to take real action and have a strategic plan so that we can get back on the winning side. So at the end of the day, what great universities do, and I do in all my heart believe this is a great university, they reinvent themselves. And that's what I think we're going to have to do. But I'd like to now turn it back over to the chairman and the rest of the board to see what comments you have for me.
Thank you, President Carter, and thank you, Chris, for your time, your deep dive on these issues that I think is important to note and underscore that these issues are not unique just to the University of Nebraska. They are unique nationwide, and we need to get out front of these issues so that we can continue to thrive. I agree with you that in facing reality, we can control only what we can control. And what other institutions are doing is really truly up to them. But I think, and the other thing I want to mention is that the sky is not falling. We're doing some really amazing things on each of the campuses, and I think that again, these are not unique challenges. We felt it's important to discuss with all of you in the audience, especially with the governor, the legislature, the taxpayers, the campuses, the faculty, staff, and our students. And I would venture to guess that each one of these students on our board, they didn't come here to have an education. They came here to get a great education, to prep them for doing great things down the road. So I'm going to stop right there and close with some comments at the end, but I want to turn it over to my colleagues and again, thank you for what you're bringing to light here. I think we can take these challenges and really convert these challenges to be opportunities. And these opportunities, then we can grow and really truly move the needle, not only for the University of Nebraska, but you hear about our state talk about 80,000 jobs that are unfilled. Imagine 80,000 families in our state and what that would do to our population and what it would do to opportunities. Those are things that, to me, are exciting and to me move the needle. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues right now and ask them for their comments, and then I will close at the end. Who wants to jump in? Regent
I'll
Kennedy.
start.
double-edged sword, Mr. President. Think about how really good it is. We have great tuition amounts compared to everyone else, right? But you take say Lincoln or Kearney or someone that you're competing with on the opposite end of the spectrum, where some type of scholarship comes in for that student, and they get 3 times the dollars for that student coming into their coffers than we do with our lower tuition. And is there a way that we could attack that?
Again, I would tell you that in the next few weeks, I will work hard to bring the budget that you expect me to bring. I won't have all the answers to some of these problem sets. I believe that there will be an opportunity to put the right team together here so that we can think a little bit differently. But I agree, it is a bit of a double-edged sword.
Rob?
Thank you for your comments and your preparation to both of you. Appreciate your candidness, and sometimes the best way to deal with situations that are not optimal is just to deal with them straight. Right, so I appreciate you bringing this to our attention, bringing this to the public's attention, I guess. And this has been going on here for some time, and it's time to address it, and so thank you for that. Much like in life, the only constant in life itself is change, and so we have to change and reinvent ourselves. We're going to have to do a better job. We're at a time where competition is immense for time, money, resources, and most importantly, students. And similar to football, it's time that we probably get back to the basics, and a lot of that includes just like blocking and tackling. We got to focus on our mission, which is to educate, to do our research, provide extension, and lastly, to provide stewardship to our state, whether it's economic development or all the many other things that we do as a university. I think that's important, that the university is looked at as a huge stakeholder in the state of Nebraska and what we offer to our citizens and to our nation as a whole. Oftentimes we all have blind spots and we have to take self-corrective action. Sometimes we notice those things on our own. Sometimes somebody has to tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, you're missing something here. I think if we just look back in the last couple months, there's probably no better example of that than what Anheuser-Busch has experienced with their Bud Light. I mean, it's something, clearly if they could go back in time and readdress and handle that situation differently, I'm sure they would. Here at the university, we've got issues that we can work through. I think one of them that we can do to attract students is to work on taking the social, the cultural, and the political issues out of the classroom and focus on our main thing, which is to educate. I think across not only Nebraska, but the nation as a whole, families would love to send their students to a university where they don't have to deal with that stuff, where they can send the students in and they can focus on what the main thing is. And as our former president, Hank Bounds, always used to say, let's keep the main thing, and focus on the main thing. I think that's really important. And if we can become a university that's known for educating, not indoctrinating, and sending the students and our graduates back into the communities and their families in a better position to help contribute to society, I think that would be very, very helpful to what we're trying to accomplish here today with these budget shortfalls. Because at the end of the day, I think people want to do those things on their own. They don't expect us to get involved in the social, cultural, and political battles. And if we can just take that and remove it and become known as an apolitical university, I think it would help us tremendously when it comes to recruitment and retention of students. We don't have to become the Hillsdale of the Plains of public universities, but we clearly shouldn't be trying to aspire to be the Stanford of the Plains either when it comes to those social, cultural, and political issues. And so I think that's one of the things we could do to separate and distinguish ourselves from the competition across the country when it comes to higher education.
Elizabeth?
I just want to say that on behalf of the Regents, I really appreciate the work that President Carter and Senior Vice President Koborek have done preparing this presentation. It's important that we get ahead of these challenges and we face them head on and that we're not reactionary. And I'm excited that that's what we're doing. I know that we're going to have to make decisions that aren't going to be easy, but I do appreciate that we're keeping the focus on maintaining high-quality, excellent education that's accessible to our students. At the end of the day, that's why we're here, and I appreciate that we're going to continue to protect that. So thank you both, and I look forward to working with you in the upcoming months.
Yeah.
Compliment you for identifying the problems and the cause of those problems. The focus will be now on the solutions. I know you're going to be working on that and coming back with it, but it's going to take a whole new paradigm and a whole new culture. There will be pushback. That means we've got to have the best leadership we've ever had. We've got to communicate that to all the stakeholders, all of us. I'm looking forward to those solutions because it's not sustainable. What got us here won't get us there. So compliments for identifying it. Now we've got a lot of work to do.
Regent Wilmot.
I would, first of all, like to say, I've told you before, I like the fact that you have several times said that your priority is education, remembering what we're here for. And I appreciate your hard work. I'm not sure I like this message a lot, but again, we're here to work on that and to fix it. And I do know that the things that I've heard across the state, the people really want the education. They want their children to come here and get the education. And all of the other things, they're not so concerned about because they believe that once the student has the education, they can go out and deal with all of the other social, cultural issues. And I agree with that. And I think if we keep our priorities right where you've said your priorities are, then as a team, I think we can fix this, work on it, and make sure that Nebraska is strong and that our students are prepared.
This is a bit of a new experience for me. I've never used such a long microphone before, but thank you for your presentation. It was very enlightening. During the middle of Vice President Kaburak's presentation, you spoke a little bit about deferred maintenance and some of our responsibilities with that. Could you go over that a little bit more in detail? So when you were talking about the $2 million versus the 2% increase, is that $2 million consistent, or was the 2% increase not already applied?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. Here. So, deferred maintenance has been a long-standing issue that this board was discussing 5-8 years ago, and charge that time was come back with a plan, because we kept talking about we have all these facilities, 900 buildings, billions of dollars of value, but we can't keep up with what it takes to. Donors have been very gracious in our facility, but it's hard to find donors who want to replace a window or replace a bathroom or repair the concrete out front, which is all really important. This is all going back to some of our strategies. Recruit top talented faculty and students. A lot of those folks buy with their eyes, and their first impression is the status of our facilities, and the better, more impressive that is. And so 3 years ago, we partnered with the legislature, primarily Appropriations Chairman John Stinner, on a package that provided 40 years of funding the university to issue bonds of up to $400 million to start rehabbing many of our most important buildings. But the important piece of that legislation was that the board, Senator Stinner, the governor, and others said, we got to find a solution to fix this problem so that we're not coming to the legislature every 10, 20 years asking for a bunch of money to fix up buildings. And so the strategy is, as buildings deteriorate, we will start putting funds into a savings account that can accumulate over time to fix those windows and concretes in 20 years or 30 years when they run through their useful life. So part of LB 384 is we are required to put 2%, so $400 million of bonds, 2% of that, $8 million a year, into a savings account. And so we will start that with the fiscal year 24 budget by putting $2 million in an account, and we'll add that $2 million for the next 4 years to get to $8 million, where the university is putting $8 million into a savings account every year. So then over 10, 20 years, that's $160 million that would be available for other deferred maintenance, that then we don't have to go back to students or taxpayers to say, we need additional funds to rehab these buildings. So we're it's painful on the front end because we got to find it in our budget, but long-term, this will save the state of Nebraska. We calculated $1.5 billion, if not more.
Just to put a fine point on that, because again, for our student regents, you haven't lived through LB 384 and one of the great successes of us leaning forward in a business model that almost no other public university in the country has. So 900 buildings with a sustainability plan that'll be covered by the state and our investment. And at the end of that period of time, by 2062, the state will no longer have to appropriate money for us to sustain our buildings, which is remarkable. It's a long-range plan. We had $800 million of unmet sustainability costs before this bill passed. And we're already taking a big bite out of that with a $400 million bond. We'll do that again here in the years upcoming. But right now, at this point, and anybody that's walked anywhere around our campuses, they know this. This is the largest amount of repair and construction we've had in our 154-year history. We have over $1.5 billion of maintenance going on, and 93% of that's being done by Nebraskans. So I know we talked about a lot of the things that we're doing. That's a big one in the good column, big one. We should be proud of that. But there's a cost, and we've got to be able to pay the cost that we all agreed to. And when you have budget challenges, it's one that we can't dismiss.
Good question. Did you have a follow-up question?
Whites.
Right. Regent Whites.
I have a question. Your electronic person here.
Yep, no,
Yep,
you're
go ahead.
live, Barb. Go ahead.
You're good.
Hi, I want to join everyone else in thanking Ted Carter and Chris Kaborik for providing us with a really clear picture of where we stand budget-wise. I see them, we all see them from month to month, but to see the biggest picture and going forward is such a helpful thing, I think, for all of us, and especially for me. The forward thinking of it, I think, is critical for us. It's time that we stopped looking in the rearview mirror and started looking for what's out there that we can add to what we're already doing in becoming more and more amazing. The other thing I think about is the transparency, your willingness to be transparent about where we are and how we spend our money. And I think that's critical for us to be transparent about that, not just for ourselves and what we're doing, but for every Nebraska citizen who needs to understand. We put articles in the paper that say $1 invested comes out as $9 for the state from the university. But I think people don't really understand that dynamic. They may not pay attention to that dynamic, but it's a powerful one in terms of the economy of our state. And I think that being transparent and walking people through what we're doing and why we're doing it is a critical part of our role as regents and administration to make sure that people understand this is why we're doing it. This is how it pays off. And I'm very excited about the way we're going about that. I also know that, having read some things in the higher ed chronicles and things like that, that one of the very few, if any, benefits of COVID was the understanding that universities had to become more flexible and more agile in making changes to how they did things. And that's how I see us as we go and look at what can we do? How can we restructure to be the kind of university we want our kids to attend? And we believe that other people in other states may want their kids also to attend. I also think there's lots of opportunity out there for people who stopped going to college and stayed in their jobs and now see their jobs disappearing or becoming less important. We have lots of people out there that we can start to begin to contact that we haven't really thought about. We've been busy doing the things we're doing to maintain ourselves. But I think that we do have a brilliant future ahead of us, both in terms of enrollment and retention. There are things we can do, especially around mental health, which Academic Affairs is looking at right now, to help our students stay in school and finish their degrees.
or their certificates, or whatever it is they need from us, continuing education, all kinds of opportunities. So I'm excited about what the possibilities are for the future. I do feel like that action feels good, and that people will feel good about a university that's taking action to make itself the best it can be. And so I thank you very much for this time and for this picture. And I agree with all the others that we have incredible leadership at this time, and we need to make the most of it.
Thank you. Regent Shear.
Thank you. I would like to thank Chris and Ted for your presentation. I was sitting here thinking, what the hell did I get myself into 60 days ago? And I volunteered for this. But I don't think any of us anticipate you becoming the chairman of amputees, and nor do we expect you to be. But what I've experienced in the 60 or so days that I've been here is that higher education seems to move much slower than a lot of what I'm used to businesses. And I don't think that's the mode that you've expressed, and looking forward to a more expedient. Time's of the essence. If a businessman was looking at this, you'd be changing by this afternoon. That you would be implementing something, even if it was wrong, to try to stop the bleeding or to improve your access to whatever it might be. The emperor is going to have new clothes. We just don't know what it looks like yet, but we better start buying some sewing machines so that we can get the job done in an efficient and orderly manner. There's a lot of opportunities in the state of Nebraska. It's a great place. I don't think we do a good enough job, and I've said this a lot, in areas where we've got young people moving back to Nebraska all the time. Unfortunately, we didn't keep them to begin with. And I think we need to do a better job going into high schools and recruiting. We need to get the best and the brightest again, and make sure that they stay and they graduate. And the state has to do a better job of welcoming them and providing the resources to get those education. But I think we need to make sure that the world knows our doors are open and how good of a facility we have in our campuses, and what we can accomplish and what we have accomplished. And I think we've got the right people in place at the time to do the right things. And I have no idea what those are going to be, but I look forward to seeing what they end up being. I want to thank you for your attention and your willingness to move us forward.
Yes, I just want to say thank you, President Carter and CFO Kaborik, for this great presentation. I came to UNL because I wanted a great and I wanted an affordable education. My brother just moved into the Scott campus yesterday as a Scott Scholar as a freshman because he wanted a great and wanted an affordable education. So I appreciate you taking the time to really walk us through in prioritizing this great and affordable education and keeping everything, keeping those as priorities. I think we have work to do, like Regent Stark and a lot of our colleagues up here have said. So I'm looking forward to these innovative ways that we can recruit and retain our students here at the University of Nebraska, because we are a great university. So I appreciate that.
Again, I'll echo those thanks to you, President Carter and Mr. Kaborik. I appreciate your candidness once again, but also your approach to being on offense, as you mentioned. Because if we, at least from the student perspective, if we do any of severe cuts or kind of make this strategy of keeping the status quo long term, that has a negative impact on the student experience. Because if there's revenue coming in for student services, for example, that has a long-term impact. And I guess that leads me to one question that I have, which is, what do you foresee the near future for things like student services and some of those extra things being as we face these economic headwinds?
Well, I'll say that we are always looking to keep those types of costs as low as we can. I mean, we've done some things, for example, with books. You've probably read about the program that we did to create more resources for students to get books. I mean, we targeted a $10 million savings. We blew right past that, and we continue to show savings in that. So we do find ways to think differently and innovatively. We're looking at, you know, ways to combine resources with our libraries. I mean, we have great library capabilities here, and we also have access into the Big Ten library system. So there are opportunities here that can be leveraged. You know, if you think about the history that I showed at the beginning of this slide presentation, just like many things in our country, we put 4 campuses together into a university system, and for the most part, through the first many years of the system, which started in 1968, we operated in silos. We have started to cross over and look at ways where we can be more efficient and share capabilities that benefit those. We've looked at things that we centralize or decentralize out of the office of the president. All of those things add up to how do we make the student experience the best we can without, again, putting those costs on the backs of students. If we're going to raise fees and it's going to improve mental health services and access, which is just as important as the quality of that service, students were willing to pay for that. They've told us that. And again, we want to listen to the students. One of the reasons that you're on this board. So we want to make sure that we're getting that type of feedback.
Thank you. That's all.
You have anything you wanted to add? Okay. Anybody else have a comment?
I had another question again. Towards the end, we heard a little bit about how there was some concerns with the student-to-faculty ratio. What does a healthy student-to-faculty ratio look like, and what budgetary considerations can we make to be?
Well, I'm not making any predictions right now, but I just know that if enrollment goes down and you don't change your staffing and your faculty, then that ratio goes down. And it looks very attractive on paper, but you may be paying for something more than what is the balance of the main, customer line, which is our students. So in higher ed, that number, if you're around that 18-to-1, is really the mark. And of course, it changes a little bit depending on how much postdoc work you're doing. So remember, when postdoc work, you're going to have much fewer faculty, for each student. So there's a balance there. And again, it's not something that you just pick a number and you stick to it. It's going to have a life of its own. It's going to evolve. And we'll look at how do we find that right balance. Again, if we say that the balance of the faculty to student ratio is based on a set number of students, and we establish that to be 50 to 51,000 students, but we're never reaching that, then those ratios will not be corrected. And that was the point of bringing that all up.
Did that answer your question? Okay. And again, you're new. You'll spend some time on these discussions in the months and year to come, and hopefully you'll gain a greater understanding of what this means. If nobody else has comments, I've got some thoughts, and then so I'll start with, nobody likes to have these discussions. I didn't run for the Board of Regents so that I could cut budgets. We don't like it in our families and in our businesses. I didn't go to law school so that I could cut my law firm budget. Didn't have a family so that we can cut that budget. We had the family, and we have our having these discussions within the family and within our businesses is so that we can be the best that we can be, right? So that my business, we cut things, we add things, we spend things, and we want to be the best law firm out there. And our family, we want to provide. I think the same is actually very true with the university. Nobody likes to have these discussions, but if we're truly going to be the best that we can be, and I'm not saying the best university, I'm saying the best we can be, and I believe that those days are ahead of us. We have to have these discussions. We can continue doing what we've done, and be a good university. But if we want the University of Nebraska to be the best, then we need to take a look at what we're doing. And do a deeper dive into the things that you were talking about. So that was the purpose of this meeting today, is that we could have the opportunity to hold this discussion, to provide transparency to the taxpayers, to our partners at the legislature, to our stakeholders, to the governor, to the campuses, to the faculty, to the staff, and to our students, so they can have a better idea of what's going on at the university right now, as well as know that we're going to take a deep dive into, so that we can enhance these things and come out better and stronger. I'm a glass half full type of guy, very optimistic on a lot of things, but I love to win, and I really do not like to lose, and to win. It pains me to see that the numbers that you were showing, Chris, that show that we can do all these things. We can increase tuition. We can cut some additional programs. That's probably a little bit. Your figure is probably a little bit high because we don't have some of the cuts that are being at the other campuses. But still, at the end of the day, we're operating at a deficit, and we don't invest in any new opportunities. New opportunities that can benefit not only the University of Nebraska, but can benefit our state, our nation, and our world. And those things are things that that's why I ran for the Board of Regents. I ran for the Board of Regents so that we can move this state forward. I liked what Regent Scheer said. I mean, this is a great state, and you can't beat the ethics and the integrity and the character of people from border to border on our 500-mile campus. Can't beat it. And we're not giving ourselves the benefit of the doubt. And we can be better, but it takes these discussions to do a reset. Maybe is what this is. So I'm excited about the opportunity for the University of Nebraska to win and to be the best. Our challenges are not unique. Higher education's facing a lot of these similar challenges from across the entire nation. But I believe too that these challenges are what's going to make us stronger. These challenges, we're going to come out leaner, meaner, and better institution that is preparing, like our student regents up here, preparing them for life after college, that they can contribute back to the state of Nebraska and help fill some of those vacant jobs. Some of those jobs and maybe raise their own families in those particular communities across our state. And so I'm excited about doing that. Again, the sky is not falling, and we are doing a lot of really outstanding things right now on our campuses, but we can be better, and we can have a greater impact on the world at each of our campuses. And the data shows that some of these areas that we need to be a little bit more competitive in terms of research and enrollment. We cannot continue status quo, and we cannot continue to cut our way to prosperity. If we are going to be the best that we can be, we've got to look at our operations, be critical of what we're doing, and come out stronger and leaner. So with that, I'm going to, and even based on what I've heard from my fellow board members, President Carter, we would like you to do this deeper dive and provide us more information at our June 22nd meeting to address some of these issues that we've heard today. I don't know. I've never heard the expression peanut butter cuts, but I think we need to look at our programs, and if these programs are providing our student regents and our students across campuses the best, then that's fantastic. If we make some additional cuts, perhaps those programs can be even enhanced. There's no sacred cows out here. All options are on the table, including structural changes. This is a university-wide effort, and no campus is exempt. So I really challenge that of you. The plan should include strategies to address these areas and where we have been coming up short. Enrollment, what are our enrollment challenges? I mean, I really appreciated hearing about Coach Rule when he talked about going through across to every high school in the state. And it's exciting for me because, again, those are great Nebraska kids. So I would expect the same from our different campuses, that they have not only sending a postcard for recruitment, but actually physically having a relationship with the guidance counselor at those different schools. If that relationship with that guidance counselor is enhanced, that guidance counselor is going to see that, gosh, the University of Nebraska is doing some pretty amazing things. You should look into going there, and I've got somebody you can talk to. That, to me, is recruitment. And having 5 children go to UNL, I can tell you that it maybe wasn't that aggressive, and they could have maybe done a little bit more. So I want to hear about enrollment and recruitment, faculty salary competitiveness. We have got to recruit and retain the best faculty that we can to make our institution the best that it can be. So I challenge that. And then federal research growth. You know how I feel about research, and you know how competitive I am in that regard too. I want to see us grow. So I'd ask that this directive to you be included in the minutes today, and appreciate and look forward to hearing what you have to come back to us with at our June meeting.
Mr. Chair, I want to acknowledge the task that you just given me. I've listened to all the comments from the board. 3 weeks. 3 weeks, I will not bring a solution, but 3 weeks I will bring the beginning of the plan to get this corrected. And I promise for all of our campus leaders and all of our campus faculty senate leads that the longer range solution of this is going to be done collaboratively with an understanding of how we're going to do this as a team. And that's the only way I know how to play as a team. And I bring that player-coach type of leadership to this problem set, and we'll take this on. But I appreciate the direction, and we'll be ready to go.
Thank you. Okay. In our notice of the virtual meeting, members of the public were notified that they must contact the corporation's secretary no less than 24 hours prior to our meeting. Additionally, our standing rules provide that individuals must provide the corporate secretary with 24 hours notice of their intent to address an item not on the board's agenda. No one contacted the corporate secretary to speak remotely or on a matter not on the agenda. The standing rules further provide that anyone desiring to speak concerning an item on the agenda for this meeting may do so, regardless of notice. Is there anyone that would like to address the board? If so, please come forward, identify yourself, and complete the sign-in sheet before you leave. You will have 3 minutes to address the board.
Good morning, President Carter, members of the Board of Regents. My name is Kelly Kaposis. I am a faculty member on the Durham School of Architectural Engineering and Construction, and I am the Faculty Senate President for UNL. As VP Kaborak just outlined for us, UNL, part of the deficit that we're going to have to maintain, UNL is going to lose over $10 million in APC cuts. The faculty are very concerned about the proposed changes and how the changes to the bylaws that were proposed in the informational portion of the agenda will not only impact UNL's budgets, but also our student athletes as well. Providing a high-quality education for the next generation of Nebraska's leaders is the reason that we are all here, and it is the responsibility that you have entrusted with us, the faculty. UNL student athletes, who are first and foremost students, are no exception. Most of UNL student athletes will not go on to compete professionally, but will go on to lead successful careers utilizing the skills that they learned on the field and in our classrooms. The UNL's Faculty Senate Intercollegiate Athletics Committee, or IAC, consists of 13 members, including the athletic director, faculty, student athletes, and student leaders. The purpose of the IEC is to protect the welfare of student athletes and ensure that student athletes are meeting academic standards and receive adequate academic support. The IEC has done an excellent job of looking after the best interest of UNL's student athletes. Many of those UNL student athletes are under the age of 19, which makes them children in the eyes of Nebraska law. How will Varner Hall and the Board of Regents work with UNL faculty, residence life, and other campus-level offices and services that our student athletes interact with every day? Who will ultimately be responsible for their education, health, and safety? How will compliance with Title IX be managed? The UNL faculty, including the IAC, were blindsided by last week's announcement of the proposed changes to the bylaws. The system is only as strong as the flagship. Moving the oversight of Husker athletics away from the flagship will have grave consequences to the academic side of the institution. In 3 of the past 4 academic years, Husker athletics donated $10 million in excess revenue back to UNL. $5 million came back to the institution each of the 5 years before that. These funds that were used to fund non-athletic scholarships for students who might not have been able to go to college otherwise. Funds that, as UNL is facing a $23 million budget shortfall and inevitable program cuts are gravely needed. Except for Rutgers University, all Big Ten schools are represented on the Big Ten Council of Presidents and Chancellors by the leader of their flagship campus. The Big Ten Academic Alliance has helped UNL negotiate better library collections and access, technology collaboration, large-scale purchasing power, and leadership development for faculty and staff, all of which are vital to the maintenance of UNL's Carnegie Research 1 status, which directly impacts Nebraska's economic development. As you review the proposed bylaws changes, you must make considerations to how this will affect UNL's budget, our academic programs, and Husker athletics as a whole. Thank you.
Is there anyone else? Please come forward and identify yourself, and if you'd sign the sheet there before you'd leave. You have 3 minutes.
Would it be okay to go into executive session after this without media present? That's the concerns that I have.
No.
Okay. Can I go off the record?
I don't know what that means. This is a public meeting.
Okay. My name is Pawnee Phoenix, Coach Pawnee Phoenix. To those loyal Nebraskans who watched UNL President Ted Carter deliver an impressive and informative speech before the Nebraska State Senators, chairing the Appropriations Committee a few weeks ago, thanks for your attention. I witnessed it, and it was absolutely stunning. First time watching him with a public speech, and it inspired me to show up today. I think the university has numerous options to grow forward. You mentioned, sir, that businesses take action immediately. Like something should be done. It shouldn't be the same thing over and over and over again. We mentioned turning points. We mentioned innovation. In the Nebraska that I envision, it would be a preeminent leadership academy and a flight school. We have incredible leadership here with President Carter, with an aviation history. I think if you're trying to move Nebraska forward, it would revolve around aeronautics, agriculture, aquaculture, and academia. Those four titles could completely transform the university system. Aviation, agriculture, aquaculture, and academia. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions, I will be at the Innovation Campus today at 3 o'clock with a visual presentation of my last 2 weeks. I went down to Kansas yesterday and saw Lake Wakanda. If you've never been to Lake Wakanda or seen nature, aquaculture, the Platte River, the university has not seen the Platte River the way that they should. Water management should be more crucial. I know the Daughtry Water organization had a meeting, but again, aviation, if we have pilots, more pilots flying over the state of Nebraska, you would have a better view of the Platte River. And with that, all kinds of business opportunities. So if you want to see more, 3 o'clock, Innovation Campus, 2nd floor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you please sign in before you leave? Right.
Is there anyone else who would like to address the board on a matter that is on the agenda? Okay, there being no other persons wishing to speak, I declare the opportunity for public comment to be closed. There being no further business, and if there's no objection, we stand adjourned. Thank you.